For decades, he encouraged Americans to keep hope alive and became, without a doubt, one of the most influential and iconic leaders of the U.S. civil rights movement. For Reverend Jesse Jackson, the pursuit of racial justice and equality was a calling that led him to grow from a protege of Martin Luther King Jr.'s to having the ear of presidents and powerful around the globe. Now, following his death at the age of 84, the world has been paying tribute, remembering Jesse Jackson as a transformative pioneer whose Rainbow Push coalition gave a voice to minorities and the underprivileged. In a moment, I'll speak to someone who knew and worked alongside him, but first a look back at his legacy and a life that will never be forgotten.
Right now! Right now!
His was a life of service and leadership,
Well, come in here.
one that started in the shadow of legends and led him to the forefront in the struggle for basic human rights. Jesse Jackson was born in the segregated South in 1941. While attending university, he became politically active and worked with famed civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. until his assassination in 1968.
Where he had stepped outside his room.
Jackson would later claim King died in his arms. Jesse Jackson was a crusader for the poor and underrepresented throughout the United States, leading the charge on issues like voting rights and equal access to education and health care with his Rainbow Push coalition. Like King before him, his message was one of community and unity in the face of injustice.
We must turn from finger-pointing to clasp hands. We must share our burdens and our joys with each other once again. We must turn to each other and not on each other and choose higher ground.
He was also a trailblazer with ambitions for the U.S.'s highest office.
The name will go into nomination for the presidency on Wednesday night, July the 20th, in fulfillment of the dreams and the hopes of those who have worked for that privilege to occur, and as an expression of the principles that this campaign represents.
His bids may have failed, but for some, they laid the groundwork for Barack Obama 2 decades later. While the last years of his life were shaped by illness, Jackson was a tireless defender of the downtrodden until the end.
Gloria J. Browne-Marshall is a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College in New York City. She's also the author of the book, A Protest History of the United States, which came out last year. Gloria, welcome back to the day. When we talk about Jesse Jackson today, what do you think is the single most important thing people should remember about his life?
I think we should remember that he gave of himself when he didn't have to. And that's something about social justice and civil rights that people kind of forget. They look at it like it's a job, but it's also something that it comes with a great deal of danger. He also was somebody who could forecast the future and realize that the role of African Americans in this country, despite what the country was doing and being so oppressive racially, was going to grow. And so he grew. He navigated the landscape as the landscape changed. He didn't stay stuck in one time period or one frame of mind. As was noted, he's run for president twice. He was in the community. And I have to say, when I was a young person, he was a guest speaker at my school in the Midwest. And I remember distinctly having him as a young person, and he was young during that time period, like older than myself, but he could speak to different people, different groups, different causes. He could be that bridge. And so I think he should be remembered as somebody who was a person for different times and different points of civil rights and social justice. He didn't just stay stuck in time. He shouldn't just be stuck in the 1960s or 70s. He was a person for today as well.
Let's start in the 1960s, though. How did he get involved in the civil rights movement and the inner circle of Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, when he was born and raised in the South, in the deep South, and he went to Chicago, and he knew that his destiny had to be beyond where he was in the South. And so when he was in Chicago, he started to do community activist work. He started to see that Martin Luther King was somebody who was coming to Chicago to try to change the North as well as the South. He's known, Dr. King is, for his work in places like Selma and Montgomery and Birmingham, but but he was also in Chicago trying to desegregate the housing there. And so when Jesse Jackson, who was a young minister at the time, became involved in social justice and civil rights, he became a young protege to Dr. King and to those other older leaders like at Reverend Abernathy and Andrew Young. And so when the assassination took place in 1968, Jesse Jackson was there, the youngest person in that group to be a witness.
We're actually looking at a picture right now from that balcony. It just disappeared, but that was just a day before Dr. King got shot. There we can see Jesse Jackson right next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. How can we understand his relationship to Dr. King? Was Jackson carrying forward King's vision or reshaping it for a new political era?
I think he was a young person learning. He was very ambitious. And there's nothing wrong with ambition, to have vision, to want to be around these luminaries who had already made their imprint in the country. And here he was at the early stages of his activism, and he wanted to learn from them. He wanted to be one of them at some point. And what better giants in the social justice civil rights arena than Dr. King and all of those around him? And so he was able, because of the tragedy that took place in Memphis, to pick up the baton and move forward, but do it in his own way and taking the next steps from the young person's perspective into the next decades. And I think he did navigate a new landscape because he was now part of the dream that Dr. King had. It makes me...
I understand. It's a very, very
Yes.
Emotional day for you.
But just to know that Dr. King opened the door for people like Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson then opened the door for people like me. So it's really a moving time.
Yeah. One of his next steps was then, of course, his move into politics. What made his path different from that of his contemporaries?
He wanted to speak across race because he grew up poor. And growing up poor, just like President Lyndon Johnson, who grew up poor in Texas, there's an idea that poverty is beyond race. Poverty is beyond religion. When you don't have enough to eat, there's very little about your color of your skin that's going to make you as angry as not having food to feed your children. And on that note, that mission, he was able to connect across the country when he was running for office. He was able to talk to poor whites and say, why are you so angry with other Black people when actually it's the rich elite who are keeping you in this position? It's the system of capitalism keeping you with their foot on your neck and not the Black person. And he was able to speak in a way, the same way I heard his voice when I was in high school and worked on projects where he and I were on panels together, that he could speak across race and across ethnicities and this connect people to something they had in common. And that was something unique about him.
Would you say he was more of a moral leader or a political one?
I think he was something in between, which is also unique because, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King was a religious leader, but he understood politics. And you have political leaders who can understand religion. What was a nice mixture that we found in Jesse Jackson was that he was a Reverend Jesse Jackson, but he also understood that the pulpit could be a place from which he could launch a campaign. And you began to see how he could use his background in being able to speak to people from a religious and moral perspective to talk about politics. It was an entree into the lives of people and the minds of people to better understand what he was talking about by using religion as a bridge into politics. So he was a mixture of both.
Some analysts say that without Jackson, and you hinted at it there, he opened the door for so many people, but without Jackson, there definitely would not have been a President Obama. Is that an assessment you would agree with?
I would think that this is a strong assessment because he laid the foundation for something that people during the 1960s, many of whom believed would not happen. And so when Jesse Jackson ran for president twice, it made it less unique for someone who's African American to run for president. Now, please keep in mind that there had been people who were African American from other non-traditional political parties running for president of the United States. So as early as 1870s, Frederick Douglass was on the ballot to run as vice president of the United States. But when you start looking at the two major political parties, Democrat and Republican, you see that for Jesse Jackson to want to not be on a third party ticket, but actually want the nomination from the Democratic Party, that was a major step. And it opened the door to make it not an unusual thing for an African American to run for office. When he spoke at the Democratic National Convention, and he talked about that, we should all have hope and keep hope alive, then you could see him as a politician. And that gave that vision to people of the possibility of a Black president. It also made it appear when he debated that it wasn't just him debating as a Black man, it's him debating about the issues on the table, the economic issues, the issues of foreign policy. So then you began to hear him as a politician and not just a Black person. And that gives rise to someone like Barack Obama, who becomes somebody who has a political platform, and he's not just running based on the color of his skin for only Black people to vote for him, but he's running with a political platform that should attract people across the country and from different groups and backgrounds.
Now, Gloria, if a young activist asked you today what they can learn from Jesse Jackson's life, what would you tell them briefly?
Keep hope alive. When I went back and listened to his speeches, it reminded me that hope is powerful. Hope is protest against the box people want to put you in, and hope can take you far. Jesse Jackson hoped for a better America and helped to make it one. So I would say he was a bridge from that time period into the 21st century, and he brought hope along with him.
And that is a message that I believe a lot of people in the U.S. need right now. That was Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
For more, let's now talk to Cheryl Scales. She describes herself as a faith-rooted justice leader who had a long-standing relationship with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Cheryl, good to have you on the show. You knew Reverend Jackson personally. How will you remember him?
To be with you this afternoon. I will remember Reverend Jackson as a true moral architect of modern justice. He was someone who never separated faith from action. He believed ordinary people could shape extraordinary change. And that's how he organized, and that's how he showed hope.
You worked with him
for me,
to keep...
He wasn't just a public figure. He was a constant reminder that justice really does require courage and persistence and the willingness to stand up when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and you yourself do that, and you worked with him to keep grocery stores in Memphis open. How did you get him to support your cause? How did you meet?
So we met through a very good bishop friend of mine who worked in community work. And when I learned of the grocery store being about to close, it would create a food desert for not only a single community, but about 9 communities. And so I went to the bishop and went to Reverend Jackson, explained the background to the story to this community. It's Memphis's historic Orange Mound. It's the first community in the country where African Americans could own their own home. And just the impact it would have for the grocery store to disappear. And explaining the backdrop from him using my background in corporate America, I understood how grocery stores worked and that wasn't the right decision for this community. And in doing so, it facilitated a meeting. The meeting moved forward, and ultimately, while they closed the doors, they did something totally different. They gave and donated the building to a competitor. So today, that community of 9 areas still has access to a grocery store.
And that's just one example of how he supported vulnerable and disenfranchised communities in the U.S. But more broadly speaking, how would you say he changed the U.S.?
I believe the answer to that question truly lies in the fact that he changed the face of American democracy through his organizing, through his initial belief that he could run for president. As a matter of fact, when I was at Princeton, my thesis, which you had to write a thesis in order to graduate, was on Blacks in presidential politics. I don't know if you can see that. And he was a feature as a part of my thesis. He changed American democracy because he believed that Black voices, working voices, marginalized voices all needed to be heard, and they needed to be heard at the highest levels. And he turned protest into policy.
America right now, and you know it better than I, is at a moment of internal upheaval. What can the civil rights advocates of today and tomorrow learn from Reverend Jackson?
I believe that many of the civil rights action of today has already learning lessons from Reverend Jackson. They're building movements, not just moments. I believe they're staying rooted in faith and a moral clarity that is required for this season. And I believe that they are tapping into what he believed, and what we know is that you can organize locally, but you also must think globally. And I believe that's true, just even as a function of our conversation here this afternoon. We can never underestimate the power of persistence, and Reverend Jackson never did. He truly taught us that justice will never be won in a single season, that it will be won when we sustain a disciplined and a courageous leadership approach over time. And I believe that that's how he will be remembered. And that's how I remember him in my heart and my head on this day. And I know many days to come.
That was community mobilizer Cheryl Scales. Thank you so much for your time, and all the best to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk to Andra Gillespie. She's a political scientist from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, specializing in African American politics and political participation. Great to have you on the show, Andra. Thank you for your time. For younger people and those outside the US who may not be as familiar with Jesse Jackson, just tell us what made him such an important figure in American public life.
Well, Reverend Jackson was a bridge between the leadership of the civil rights movement, so those members of the greatest generation who have mostly passed on at this point, into the 21st century. So if you think about his role in Operation Breadbasket for the SCLC, his connection to Martin Luther King, and then you see him translating into formal politics with his own runs for president in 1988, you don't get Barack Obama without Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson kind of expanded the imagination of what was possible so that you could see a Black man run successfully for office in terms of actually being able to win primary states. And then there are rule changes that Jackson was able to leverage from the Democratic National Committee that are a feature of Democratic primary politics today. So for instance, the party moved away from winner-take-all primaries as a result of Jackson's leveraging and urging the party to move away from that. That helped Barack Obama secure the 2008 Democratic nomination for president. So in many ways, we wouldn't have had Barack Obama had we not had Jesse Jackson in 1988.
So an extraordinary legacy, obviously. If we sort of focus in, what do you see as Jackson's most important contributions to US society? For example, I believe he was a lifelong advocate for the poor and underrepresented. So what would you say was sort of the most important thing that he brought?
I mean, there are a number of things. His civil rights advocacy cannot be diminished. We could think about sort of the ways he was trying to provide relief and support and job training through his roles in the SCLC, and then in Operation Push, his own organization and the Rainbow Coalition. We cannot underestimate the impact of his presidential candidacies in 1984 and 1988. We also would have to talk about kind of his post-electoral advocacy and his continuing to push for civil rights. He was a very prominent civil rights leader. And, you know, even though he didn't achieve the same heights that Martin Luther King did, and there are some critiques about the model of looking at one leader, he was one who was looked to as being one of the key leaders and organizers in African-American communities. So he was somebody whose legacy will forever be sort of important and rich, should always be spoken of in history. And I think we do have to talk about him as being a multifaceted leader and one who was complicated and certainly not without his flaws.
You just mentioned the Rainbow Push Coalition. So he set up organizations like that, which, advocating for civil rights, economic equality, social justice, bringing people together. Do you see any traces left of his attempts at bringing people together in the way that he did in today's very polarized political climate?
Absolutely. I mean, if you can look at things like the Black Lives Matter movement and its affiliates as trying to build on that work, trying to correct some of the mistakes that were made in previous generations. But you also see it in terms of African Americans who organized to try to push for greater representation in the arts, greater representation in corporate America, in terms of thinking about boycotts, even though he is not the progenitor of a boycott per se, right? He certainly carried on that tradition from his forebears, like people like Leon Sullivan. But he's also, people are thinking about that today. If you see in the efforts of people to boycott Target, for instance, right? He was, advocating that people target and boycott South Carolina for vacations because of their refusal to take down the Confederate flag. So, I mean, he's very much in a long tradition and a long line of Black activists who are using a multitude of tools to try to address issues related to racial justice. And those who are continuing in his footsteps today do owe him a debt of gratitude.
We're going to have to leave it there. But thank you so much. That was Andra Gillespie from Emory University in Atlanta, speaking about the American civil rights leader, Jesse Jackson. Andra, thank you.
Thank you.